Good evening, everyone. It's about 6:30. I hope I'm live. It says I'm live. Maybe I can get some feedback from someone. So I hope that I'm live at this time. I'll give some other people time to get in. I think I'm live. Somebody will give me a thumbs up to let me know that I'm live. Hello. I am Craig James, and I am here in Clayton, North Carolina. So is there anybody out there that can let me know that I'm live? Anyone? All right. There we go. Thanks, Demetrius. I appreciate that. So I'm just going to wait to see a few more people join us. It's a great evening here in Clayton, North Carolina. The weather is very nice, so we're going to get started very shortly. We've been having some great temperatures here lately. So, looking forward to a great time here on Facebook with you guys, ladies and gentlemen, and all those that's interested in Civil War and photography collection, especially 19th century photography. Looking forward to that. So, hello again, everyone. My name is Craig James, and I'm here in Clayton, North Carolina. And at this time, I'll be doing a presentation, and this presentation is on behalf of the show Caretakers, and which is sponsored by the Civil War Photo Collectors Society, directed by good friends of mine, Doug York and Ron Coddington. And this presentation, along with other presentations like this, can be viewed on the Civil War Faces and Caretakers YouTube channel even after this is done. So keep that in mind. So we give a great shout out to Doug York and to Ron Coddington for the work that they do and for all that they put into making this happen through the Civil War Photo Collectors Society, as well as Caretakers. Again, my name is Craig James. I live here in Clayton, North Carolina, just outside of Raleigh, North Carolina. About 20 minutes east of Raleigh. And I am a collector of 19th century African American photography. And prior to getting into this, well, let me just tell you a little bit about myself. My day job, what I do from day to day, is that I'm a criminal defense attorney. And so I find myself in court almost every day, although courts have been closed down for the last 2 months. And it's been quite nice, actually, not having to go to court every single day. I see that my sister is on. Hello, how are you? Love you too. Thank you for joining us. So, about 18 years ago or so, or longer than that, maybe a little longer than that, the Civil War has always been an inspiration. It's always been something that intrigued me and caused me to want to know a little bit about it, because it has always been somewhat controversial from different perspectives. Depending on who you talk to, there's always that question of why the Civil War went on, how did it end, why did it end, what was the purpose of the Civil War. So it's always intriguing, and it always generates good conversation when you talk to individuals about the Civil War and what was going on, because we know there was slavery, and we know that the North and the South were fighting, and we know all that's going on. We know there is an economic concern and all of these things that's going on about the Civil War. So it's interesting to study the Civil War and to get perspectives about what's going on during the Civil War and what's going on as it relates to people, most importantly. So I've always been intrigued about the Civil War, and I've always also enjoyed history. And I enjoyed history from different facets. One, antique collecting. I love antiques. I think things were built so much better. Many years ago, 100 years ago, things were just built so much better. Things were not fabricated so quickly. Things were built by hand and with care, and the soul of a man or woman was put into what they were building, and it reflected in the product. A lot of times now today, because of manufacturing, because of technology, we're able to build things quickly and manufacture them, and they don't even last as long. So from that aspect as well. So history has always been intriguing, and it's always been great. It's always been fun to get into history and to study things and find out how things came about, to think about the ideologies of others from that time period, and to read about the insights of others from that time period. So history has always intrigued me. But then about 18 years ago, somewhere around 2002, I got into history of photography. And the way that I got into the history of photography was through one of my best friends. It's a young man named Dennis Williams. Dennis lives in Raleigh, North Carolina. And about 18 years ago, Dennis and I were on a trip together with our families, and we were hitting antique shops, and all of a sudden, I find myself watching Dennis as he asked these people in the antique shops about something called a tintype. And I'm wondering, what is a tintype? And my first thought was, I didn't know my good friend Dennis was a collector of little tin soldiers. That's what I thought they were. And eventually I asked Dennis, what do you keep asking these people about a tintype? What is that? And he sort of chuckled and said, oh, so you don't know what a tintype is? And I said, no, I don't know what a tintype is. He said, a tintype is a photograph. And I was like, oh, okay, interesting. And then he began to educate me as to what a tintype was, and educate me on 19th century African American photography, or 19th century photography as a whole. And that's when I got into 19th century photography, specifically 19th century African American photography. Once I learned what it was, once I got an opportunity to hold it in my hand, it grabbed me, and it took a hold of me, and it basically captured my attention ever since that day. Because I had an opportunity to hold into the palm of my hands so much history. I had an opportunity to look into the eyes of individuals that lived 100 years before I ever came into the world or was ever thought about. And all of a sudden, here I am holding this history in the palm of my hand, and I am amazed at what I see. So, in 2002, I went with Dennis Williams to a place called Emeryville, California, and I went to a photo show. And at that photo show is where I saw all of these amazing images. I saw collectors of these amazing images, and I had never seen anything like that before. And I was amazed. I was simply amazed. And later that year, I happened to go on a business trip to San Diego, California. And while I was there, I saw a flyer that talked about a photo and postcard show. And I slipped away from the business trip and went to the show. And it was there that I purchased my first image. And my first image was a photo album of tintypes and cabinet cards. And we'll get into that a little later during this presentation, where you'll understand what a tintype is and what a cabinet card is. During this presentation, I'll show you a few of the images that are in my collection that have intrigued me for quite some time now. And with that being said, I would like to introduce you to the first image that I'll show you in my collection. Now, I'm going to show you what is known as a daguerreotype. I hope you'll be able to see it pretty good. A daguerreotype is a photograph that came into being in 1839. I've also had it blown up on a piece of paper so that you can see it a little better, because a daguerreotype is also called a mirror image, and based on how you hold it, sometimes it's very difficult to see. So I took the opportunity to copy some of these and blow them up so that you could get a better look, hopefully. So we're talking about a daguerreotype, which was invented in 1839. This is a daguerreotype of a gentleman. I love this image because basically when you look at him, he is a man of pride, a man of strength. You can see it in his face. You can see how his fist is clenched, and you can just see how he's ready to take on whatever that is standing before him and succeed at doing what it is that needs to be done. So this image, I just love this image because it does have such a intense look. It captures him, and he's staring straight into the camera. The camera has his attention, and he has the attention of the camera. And you can tell that he is a man of pride. He's dressed in his best. His eyes are piercing. His demeanor is one of strength and pride. And just to see him there, just to travel back in time to be able to know that he existed in a moment in time. Now, I don't know his name. I don't know the type of work that he did. I don't know his family history. But what collecting has given me the opportunity to do is to take a look at photography from 100 years ago. Look into the faces of a people, and then to write their story. To write a story that comes from within me as the photograph speaks to me. And from time to time, I go through my photographs and I flip through them just to see what the photograph might say to me today or tomorrow. And it's always something different. And believe it or not, there are times when I look into the photograph today, and then I look into it weeks later, and I notice something that I didn't see weeks before. And it gives me this opportunity to write these stories and to say what I believe would be a good story or a nice fitting story. It doesn't have to always be dismal. It doesn't always have to be one of conquering or one of belittling. It can be one of pride. I can make him out to be a businessman, an entrepreneur, someone who is strong, someone who is commanding others. He doesn't have to be defeated. I get to write that story. you could get to write that story. That's one of the things that grabbed me when I began to collect these photographs. So this is a daguerreotype. And again, it's a wonderful photograph that I have in my collection, and it's one that I cherish quite a bit. So take a good look at it. I hope you can see it very well. The next photograph that I would like to show you in my collection is a photograph known as an ambrotype. Now, an ambrotype is a photograph that is on glass. It is a negative, and then you put a positive to the back of the glass, and then the image comes forth onto the glass. And these came about in the 1850s. One, they were a little less expensive than the daguerreotype, because the daguerreotype is a photograph on polished silver, which is then placed against a brass backing or copper backing, and the photograph was somewhat expensive to produce. Now we have the ambrotype. Comes into the 1850s. We have the ambrotype. The ambrotype is on glass. Even though it may be less expensive, it's much more fragile than the daguerreotype. But the photo that I would like to show you is this photo. A wonderful photo of a couple. And this photograph is an ambrotype, which dates approximately the late 1850s, early 1860s. Some historians believe that the ambrotypes went out shortly after the 1860s. Well, 1860, 1861, somewhere in that neighborhood. So this photograph would be either pre-Civil War or just as the Civil War is kicking off. This is a couple that just screams love and commitment and endurance. They are ready to endure whatever is thrown at them. They they are connected with each other, very much so. And in a book that I put together, a pamphlet of some of my images, I put together in a pamphlet, and a lot of times I sell that pamphlet when I do exhibits and things of that nature. I put this image in the booklet, and in the description of the image, I talk about love is not easy during certain times. It's necessary. It's that love for another that will give you the strength to be able to go forth, to be able to overcome. And it's these type images and these type things that allow me to look at these pictures and write these type things and say things about these individuals that's living during a time, as we know, especially in the South, are some horrific times. And here in this photograph, during this horrific time, we find a couple who are able to find themselves in love, connected with one another. And sometimes it's difficult when you stand alone, and things are a lot easier or a lot more manageable when you have someone standing next to you by your side, encouraging you. Someone standing next to you saying, it's going to be all right. Someone standing next to you believing in you. And even though the signs of the time don't believe in you, and even though the signs of the time are beating you down, to be able to come home to someone that's going to lift you up can make all the difference in the world. So this is an ambrotype, and I just love this image. And one thing about this image, I don't know if you can see it, but the young lady is holding the photograph. She's holding a case, which is a photograph inside that case of someone, probably a loved one, that's been able to get their image taken. So we call this a lot of times a picture in a picture, because she has that picture. So that's just a prime example of how we are able, these photographs from such a long time ago are able to speak to us. And we can see that not only were we there alone from time to time, but we were also there in love. So that's wonderful. Now my next photo that I would like to show you is a tintype photograph. It is a tintype photograph of a African American Union soldier. Now I only have one of these in my collection. Of course, I wish I had 50 of them, but the reality is to have 50 of these would be an amazing feat. They're very difficult to come by. When you do encounter them or find them on the market, they are quite expensive to acquire. But this is a Union soldier. So here we are. Captured by a camera, standing as a soldier during the Civil War. So I would like to say this at this point. What photography does, especially from the 19th century, it validates history for me. Sometimes we can get into a debate as to whether something did or did not happen, whether it existed or did not exist, or whatever the debate is about. But if there was a debate as to whether or not African Americans were soldiers during the Civil War, that they were given guns and that they were dressed and ready to fight, and I was having a debate, I would simply go to my collection and pull out this photograph and say, I have a photograph from that time period that validates history. You could not be able to, you would not be able to discredit this photograph. It is not altered. It's a photograph from the 1860s that validates the fact that we were there. We were there during this Civil War, and there's nothing you can say about it. That was one of the other things that captured my attention and grabbed a hold of me. How these photographs from so long ago would validate our history. Because, as we all know, any book that is written, any dissertation that is given, it's given from the perspective of the individual delivering the information. So whatever their perspective is, or whatever conclusions they draw, that's what we have. Until someone challenges it, or someone brings forth better information, oftentimes that's what we end up with. And these photographs gave me the opportunity to sit back and look into the faces of a people that were going through an horrific time, a very, very tough time. This is the actual photograph. I don't know if you can see it. That's in my collection of the soldier. And then you can see the blow up that I had done. And this is the actual photograph of the couple. I hope you're able to see that pretty good. But it's one thing to see these all blown up on a piece of paper, but it's another thing to actually hold them in your hand. It's actually amazing. That's why I really get a kick out of doing exhibits whenever I get an opportunity to do an exhibit, I really get excited about doing an exhibit and inviting individuals in so that they can get a close-up, a bird's eye view of these photographs. And I can't remember an exhibit that I've hosted whereby someone did not walk away amazed at the photography from the 19th century, especially the 19th century photography. So that is a soldier. That is a Civil War soldier, African-American Civil War soldier. Now, I wish that I had a multitude of North Carolina images, but for whatever reason, I don't. I don't have a multitude of North Carolina images. In fact, I believe that the only images that I have in my collection from North Carolina are two images. One is called a cabinet card, and one is called a CDV. One is out of Raleigh, one is out of Wilmington, North Carolina, not far from where I grew up, because I grew up in Pender County. Pender County neighbors New Hanover County, which is Wilmington, North Carolina. So I was able to acquire this amazing cabinet card of a fire chief out of Wilmington, North Carolina. I mean, simply amazing. And I'll tell you why it's even more amazing. This is a blow-up version of the same cabinet card. It's even more amazing because there was a time when Wilmington was our largest city in North Carolina. And not only that, Wilmington was mostly controlled by African Americans. African Americans held positions of leadership. African Americans held positions whereby they had been elected to certain positions. And then there was a riot. There was a riot of 1898 where many African Americans were slain. There was an overthrow of the government, pretty much. But prior to that, this cabinet card would suggest not only is he a fireman, but if you look close enough at his shirt, you'll see on the front of his shirt the FC, which stands for Fire Chief. He's actually the chief officer. He's the man in charge. He is the man in charge. So obviously this would have been prior to 1898, before the overthrow of the government, the overthrow of the city. Many African Americans were killed. Many African Americans fled the city and went out west as a result of that. History says that there was somewhere between 60 and 300 African Americans that may have lost their life as a result of that overthrow. And I know that is a big stretch, 60 to 300, but they believe that the reason that is because some people were injured, severely injured, and died weeks or months later as a result of their injuries. So that's why they believe the number that stretches there, 60 to 300 African Americans that may have been killed. But what I have had the opportunity to do is to own this card. I don't know his name. This card has been published in another book, but when it was published, there was no identifying information as to who he was. But it would be something amazing to discover who he is, who he was, and which fire department he worked at, and things of that nature. So that might be one of the projects that I'll have to take on sometime in the near future. So, Fire Chief, Wilmington, North Carolina. Amazing. This is a cabinet card. So this is a photograph that's kind of mounted on cardboard-like stock, and it's about 4.5 inches by 6.5 inches in diameter. And then, so here you have an African-American fire chief. Again, this photograph validates that the African-Americans had achieved great things, even though this is post-Civil War, but it was prior to the turn of the century that he served as a fire chief. The next photograph that I want to show you is what is called a CDV, carte de visite, which is a French term for visiting card. This card has a companion card, which I do not own. And I'm going to hold it up so you can get a look at it. In period script on this card, someone wrote, "Before emancipation." Here's the blow-up version of the card. My blow-up versions, in the color on them all came out brown like, so I apologize for that. But so this card, someone wrote on it in period script, "Before emancipation." You can look at his face. You can tell he's not smiling. There's really nothing to be happy about. They wrote "Before emancipation." The companion card to this is a photograph of him, and he has a big smile on his face. And is written on it, "After emancipation." So as you can see, when these photographs were produced, they were capturing not only the image of the individual that's set before the camera, but they're also capturing the atmosphere of the times. Someone had the insight to be able to say that, looking upon his face, that he's not happy. Maybe times are not best for him right now, that maybe he's going through some things. Maybe there are some challenging times. Maybe things could be different. Things could be a little better for him. And so on this CDV, as I said, someone wrote "Before emancipation." We know emancipation, when it came about, 1864, 1865. We know African Americans celebrate Juneteenth and things of that nature, how it had to travel across the country, and some people knowing that it has happened, others waiting to get the news. So we know all about that. Civil War, Abraham Lincoln, Emancipation Proclamation, declaring that African Americans are no longer slaves, that they're going to be considered no longer the chattel or the property of another, but they are going to be considered as individuals just like everyone else. And so they wrote on this card, as they looked in this young man's face, and someone declared "Before emancipation." That's what his face said to them. This is before emancipation. This is called a CDV. Again, carte de visite. And it's just an amazing card to be able to look into this young boy's face. He doesn't have the best clothing. Of course, things are rough for him. But this card gives me the opportunity to know that there was a moment in time when this young man was able to sit and get his image captured by a camera. And that moment in time will continue to exist as long as that photograph exists. As long as that photograph is not destroyed, that moment in time will be captured. And anyone could hold it in the palm of their hands and see his face and imagine what was going on during that time. Again, this is a blow-up version of "Before emancipation." So my next card, or next photo that I'll show you, is another ambrotype. The images come in different sizes. we have full plate, half plate. It'll be difficult to show you what those are right now. But the images come in different sizes: full plate, half plate, quarter plate, 6th plate, 9th plate, 8th plate, 16th plate, which is, I'm going down in size. Like this is a 9th plate ambrotype. I want you to take a look at this. The reason I acquired this image this year, I just wanted you to see this image. I wanted to get the opportunity to show this image. This is an ambrotype. This ambrotype, keep in mind, ambrotypes kind of vanished or faded out. They had a short lifespan. They came in early 1850s, and they kind of faded out right around 1860, 1861. Hello, Anita. Hey, Patrice, and Alita. Thank you guys for joining us. But I wanted to show this one. I acquired it this year, not very long ago. And the reason I wanted to show it is because of this wonderful shirt this gentleman is wearing. And so I've reached out to a couple of individuals who I know have degrees in studying fabrics and things of that nature, and they work in textile and things of that nature, and PhDs in textiles. And I'm trying to get some information as it relates to this shirt because it's such an amazing shirt. And the other reason that I wanted to show this gentleman is because he is just beautifully black. He's just, I mean, his skin is just so beautifully dark. And he has got to be probably the darkest person that I have in my collection. And I just love his dark, deep, dark skin. So this is an ambrotype from 1850s, early 1860, 1861. So we're talking right around or just before the Civil War. And it's just an amazing image. And as I look in his face, I can see, if you had the opportunity to hold this in your hand under the right lighting, you can see that one of his eyes are sort of appear to be injured or damaged in some way. And so then you have to ask yourself, I wonder what happened. What would have caused him to have such an injury, something of that nature. But it's just an amazing image. I am so glad to have acquired it. And I got this image off of eBay recently. So it's an amazing image. So this is an ambrotype. So I'll hold it up again close. Maybe you can get an opportunity to look at his face. You can see his beautifully dark skin, which is just amazing, I think. Yeah. So, like I said, I've been collecting these images since 2002. And after I got started collecting, I remember talking to my sister about it one day. And a few weeks or a few months later, I get a call from my sister. And my sister says to me, hey, do you know that there is a photograph of your great-great-great-grandmother, and it's still on the plantation where she was a slave? And of course, that just blew my mind. So I called her, and she said, yeah, I was talking to a elderly relative of ours, and she was telling me that, and I was telling her about your collecting, and she told me that there is a photograph of our great-great-great-grandmother, and it's at the plantation where she was a slave. And I was like, oh my God. And little did I know that the plantation, which is known as Sycamore Springs Plantation in Pender, Duplin County area there, the property, a lot of the property still exists. It's still owned by the family. And it was there. And it's amazing how something can be right up under your nose and you just don't know about it, because that's that was the case with me about Sycamore Springs. I mean, I'd heard about it, but just never really registered it or processed it deeply within myself until I got that phone call. And then I called some other relatives, and they made some phone calls for me. And the relatives that were living on the plantation, they put us in contact, so I was able to talk to them and get an invitation to go to the plantation and visit the plantation. Sycamore Springs Plantation is also commonly known as the Old James Plantation. And it was there that Dennis and I went. Dennis, my good friend Dennis Williams, went with me on a nice winter day. And we went there and we met the residents of the plantation, and we sat and we talked. And I got an opportunity to flip through some photo albums and some books, and photo albums, and look at some photos and flip the page, and bam, there it was. That was the photograph. And it was my great-great-great-grandmother, Nursey James, holding young Jenny, and they're situated out in a field on the property that was once a slave plantation. And it was amazing. And what led me to that photograph, or to that discovery, was my collecting of 19th century photography. And, you know, that is something that will always resonate with me. And I was not able to acquire that photograph. I was only able to acquire a copy of the photograph. But that photograph does exist. And it's an amazing photograph just to see my three greats grandmother situated in a field where she was a slave, holding a relative of what would have been a slave owner, or distant relative of what would have been the slave owners. And that was simply amazing. Simply amazing. Collecting got me into that, led me to that discovery. And I was looking for my book. I thought I'd set it out because I have a picture of that. I have that picture in the center of my pamphlet. Now, the next piece that I would like to show you is a tintype. And the reason I want to talk to you about this tintype is because when you look at it, you see what you would call a mammy, and then you see a young white kid leaning up against her. I hope you guys can see this. I hope the light is not reflecting too bad. But the reason I love this image is because, one, it shows her strength. It shows her tenacity. But secondly, it shows the love that this kid, and this is an image that I bought out of Ohio. Interestingly enough, they were able to identify the young kid. His name is James E. Gift. So there was documentation as it relates to James E. Gift. But usually, and unfortunately, his mammy is not named. So we have James E. Gift. And James is resting on his mammy. And there's nothing that you can tell me that would change my mind in believing that James didn't love this woman and that this woman didn't love James. It is such an amazing image. We can go back all of these years and we can see these two individuals interacting through photography. And in that photograph, I think we could safely say that James is comfortable resting on her. And she's okay with James resting on her. I think they love each other. I think she had cared for him. James understood the soothing touch of her hand. He understood the comfort of her voice. And it's through photography that we can see that these two people interacted in such a way. That's what this collecting of 19th century photography has done for me. It has given me this opportunity to look back at certain situations and how certain individuals were interacting with each other. And you can tell by the body language. You can tell when someone doesn't want to be there, or you can tell when someone fully understand that they both are there and that they both understand what's sort of going on. Now, oftentimes in photography, when there is a black and a white, oftentimes the black is merely a prop, I believe, because they don't look into the camera, they're looking away, their head is bowed, and they are merely a prop. They're not a subject of the photograph at all. And you can understand why, because if you're going to have a child that you have to keep still for a minute or two as this photograph develops, you're going to place the child with the person that cares for them most often, the person that the child is most comfortable with. So if you have a mammy or you have a nanny that has cared for the child for such a long time, then what you would do is place the child with that mammy or nanny, and then the child would sit still long enough so that the photograph would come out without a blur and develop well. You can look on her face. If that was your grandmother and she said something to you, I guarantee you, you would get right in line. I know I would. She has that stern look. But even with that stern look, little James E. Gift knows that she loves him, and she knows that James E. Gift loves her. That photograph describes that. It captures that moment. That's the moment it has captured. Wonderful experience. Wonderful photograph. This is a loose tintype. A tintype is a photograph on an iron plate. There's actually no tin in it. It's actually on an iron plate. But this photograph is wonderfully tinted. You don't find them like that often, but when you do, you really want to try to get your hands on them because the tinting is magnificent, and this is just a wonderful piece of history. The next photograph that I'm going to show you is another loose tintype, and I acquired this image many years ago, and someone had the wisdom and the insight to stamp into the image the identification of the individual and the year. So this is a loose tintype of Sam Butts. A loose tintype of Sam Butts. It was taken in 1865. So we're talking right at the close of the Civil War. Sam Butts. Now the question becomes, why is Sam dressed like that? Sam has a ribbon around his neck. He has on a high top hat. I mean, he has on a long coat. He has a basket that his hand is resting on. Why is Sam Butts dressed like that? I mean, a wonderful image. This is his moment. This is that one moment in time when Sam is the center of attention. Dressed to the nine. Did he come home from the war and they're celebrating his survival? I don't know. Was there a parade where Sam was the honoree, maybe being celebrated for some accomplishment? I don't know. That's the beauty in part. We can look at these photographs from 1865, 155 years ago, and we don't know the story. But we can sit down and contemplate. We can sit down and consider what might have been going on. And we could write a story for Sam Butts. Sam knows why he was there. And I can only imagine that it was a moment of celebration just because of the way he's dressed. And the fact that Sam is getting his image captured on this particular day. Over the last 18 years, I have been able to acquire approximately 275 African American images in my collection. Now, my collection is a sort of like a living organism. It is constantly changing. It is constantly evolving. The first images that I purchased in San Diego, California was an album, as I said earlier. That album contained 10 types and a number of cabinet cards and CDVs. I paid $400 for that album. And back then, that was a lot of money. And as my collection have grown and as the quality of my images have improved, I have been able to work hard and acquire some pretty nice images. I say that because there may be some new collector, a novice collector that wants, or someone that's interested in getting started in collecting. What I would say to you as a novice collector is collect what you can afford initially. Collect it. It may not be everything you want, but collect it. Start your collection, and as your collection grows, as with mine, those first images that I collected, I was able to trade and trade up. So it gave me the opportunity from time to time that when I didn't have cash on hand to purchase a nicer image that was now available to me, I was able to use a combination of some cash and some images that I had collected earlier that I hadn't paid a lot for, but because it was something that interested someone else and someone else wanted it, I was able to improve my collection. So I would say to that novice collector to go out there, find what you're looking for, and I would also say, if possible, try to find an area that you're interested in, because there's so much out there, and trying to collect everything is going to be challenging, especially starting now. I started 18 years ago, but if I had started 30 years ago, I would have been able to acquire some images at a much better price than I was paying 18 years ago or what I'm paying today. So get started, buy what you can afford, hold on to it, use it to improve the quality of your collection. Because sometimes it's not so much as quantity, but you want to try to get quality images that you really care about, images that really speak to you, and the quality is good. But sometimes you just can't afford that out the gate, so you get those smaller images, you get those pretty good images at a pretty good price, you hold on to them, you go to the shows, you go to the trade fairs, and you're able to show someone what you might have, and someone may be looking for a certain image to complete a part of their collection, and you may have that image, and then they may have something that you are looking for that gives you the opportunity to trade those images and not so much always having to pull cash out of your pocket, but to use images that you've collected earlier. That's how I've been able to build my collection. I mean, without the possibility of trading, I just would not have been able to financially afford some of the images that I have acquired, because the images can become quite costly. So that's what I would say to you as a new collector. I would also say to you as a new collector, try to find someone that's been collecting for a while. At the Emeryville show that I talked about earlier that I went to in 2002, I met a gentleman by the name of Greg French. And I sat at Greg's table and I began to talk with Greg. And Greg and I became very good friends. So I can call Greg at any time and ask him any questions about any image. Also, Mr. Doug York. Doug York is someone that I've met at a trade show. He and I have talked. He and I have traded. There have been times when I've asked questions of Doug about certain things because I know Doug has a great sense of images, especially as it relates to Civil War, age of images and things of that nature. So Doug is open to me contacting him, and he responds and gives me his advice and talks to me, and that's great. So I have mentors in place. Dennis Williams. Dennis was already familiar with these things, so I asked Dennis a lot of questions, and I don't mind asking questions. You shouldn't mind asking questions because I'll be honest with you, I've bought a couple of fakes before, and so it looked good to me, but everything shiny isn't gold. So because I have those mentors, I've been able to learn and to grow and to do things better. Even with Ron Coddington, being able to talk with him, being able to get insight from him, these gentlemen with the Civil War Photo Collectors Society. Ron has written a wonderful book, Images of Civil War, and I even had an opportunity to write a review of Ron's book. So he and I have sat and talked. So I have great mentors like Doug York and Ron Coddington and then Greg French. Unfortunately, we just lost a great mentor, Dennis Waters, who passed away in the last week or so, who was a great friend of mine. And there are so many others that I get an opportunity to call upon when I have questions and need advice and insight before I make a jump. And they're always open to give me good sound advice. And they even tell me what I should be paying for something if I have a question about that or something like that. So find you a good mentor. And again, start your collection. You just can't jump out. Well, some of you might have deep pockets. I don't know. But if you don't have deep pockets, I tell you to go to flea markets, antique shops, try to find you some inexpensive images and start your collection. Then try to narrow down what you really want to collect as it relates to that. Maybe you want to just collect images with animals in them, or images with occupational images, or women with fancy hats, or men with beards. I don't know. Oh, and by the way, this is my quarantine look. I normally don't have this beard right here, but we're gonna go with that today. So before I close, I want to quickly tell you two quick stories. One, a couple things. For all of you guys that are enthusiasts and Civil War experts, I have this image right here of a young kid. It's a tintype. Doug York has given me some feedback on it. So I'm trying to get some other feedback on it as to what you think might be going on in this image. It's a tintype in a nice little uniform. Maybe someone out there knows what's going on and can give me some insight as to what's going on with this little kid, whether it's Civil War or what. Appreciate that. So here's a blow-up version of that. So quickly, two quick stories. One, sometimes you purchase something online and you never know what you're going to get when the package comes. So I made a purchase online years ago, and I don't have many Southern images in my collection, but this was a Southern image, and it was in an obscure place on eBay. The description was not very good, and so I took a chance, and I said I was going to purchase it, and I did. And the guy called it a cabinet card, and so when the package comes in, I get this big package, and I say, wow, why did this guy put this cabinet card in such a large package? Because in such a large package, it could very easily get bent or broken. And I opened the package, and when I opened the package, to my surprise, it was a mammoth card. This card is huge, and it is amazing. And my jaw dropped when I opened it. And I was so thankful that he or she did not do a good job placing it on eBay nor describing it. It's out of Macon, Georgia. A great Southern image, a mammoth card. When I received this card, I called Greg French and I asked him how many mammoth cards or cards this size he had in his collection, and he told me none. So I was like, oh wow. And he's been collecting for approximately 40 years, and he has no card this size in his collection. So I was thrilled, and I didn't pay very much money for it. Lastly, I was on eBay just searching, and I get a note. I come across something that seems too good to be true, and it was going to close during a time when I was going to be in church. So when I went to church that morning, I told my pastor, I said, Pastor, I really need to go into your office and use your computer at a certain time of the church service. There's something I have to bid on. And he was kind enough to let me do that. So I go into his office, I bid. There was only one other bidder, so it was just one of two bids. I won the bid. And like I said, sometimes you just think things are too good to be true. So I wait for the package to arrive, and the package does arrive. And inside that package was this: an original cabinet card of the greatest abolitionist known to man, Frederick Douglass. And I was flabbergasted. I am still so excited to own this piece of history. Frederick Douglass was the most photographed person of the 19th century. And here in my hand, in my collection, I have a photograph of the greatest abolitionist of the 19th century, Frederick Douglass. It's amazing. It's simply amazing, and I am so proud to be able to own this image. And it came in this it's some type of period. It's not a frame. I understand it is some type of photography development thing, and it even have a little timer thing on the back, but it is an amazing piece of history to own. And I am so grateful to own that piece of history. Ladies and gentlemen, one thing I normally do when I do exhibits is I put together a pamphlet called The Unfolding of Negro History Through the Eye of a Lens, and it's just a wonderful little pamphlet. And inside, right in the middle, that's the photograph, I don't know if you can see it, of my great-great-great-grandmother Nursey James, situated at the Sycamore Springs Plantation, holding young Jenny. It's right in the center of the book. So, time has flown, and I really want to give a shout out and a thank you to Caretakers and to the Civil War Photo Collectors Society, which are directed by Doug York and Ron Coddington, for giving me this opportunity to be able to present and show pieces of my collection. And again, keep in mind that you can view this presentation and other presentations like this at the Civil War Faces and Caretakers YouTube channel. So please take the opportunity to do that. And again, I want to thank each and every one of you for joining me in this presentation. And I hope that you have gained some insight. I hope you've been inspired. I hope it will cause you to want to go out and to acquire some of these images. Although I do not want you to become my competition, but if you do, we can do it together. There's plenty to go around, and I look forward to talking with some of you sometime in the near future, hopefully. And again, I just want to thank you so much for joining in and for participating in this hour of presentation. And thank you for looking at my collection. Take care.